Hello, guys. Let's continue reading another chapter of Peter and Wendy book. Chapter 16 They Return Home. By 3 bells that morning, they were all stirring their stumps. They were all stirring their stumps. For, for there was a big sea running, and Toros, the boatswain, was among them, with a rope's end in his hand and chewing tobacco. They all donned parrot clothes, cut off at the knee, shaved smartly, and tumbled up, with the true nautical roll hitching their trousers. It need not to be said that who, it's not to be said who was the captain. Nibs and John were the first and second mate. There was a woman aboard. The rest were tars before the mast, and lived to the forecastle. Peter had already lashed himself to the wheel, but he piped all hands and delivered a short address to them. Said he hoped they would do their said he hoped they would do their duty like gallant hearties, but that he knew the old scum of the Rio and the Gold Coast, and if they snapped at him, he would tear them. The bluff the bluff eastward and struck the note sailors understood, and they cheered him lustily. Then a few sharp orders were given, and they turned the ship round, and nosed her for the mainland, and nosed there for the mainland. Captain Payne calculated, after consulting the ship's chart, that if this weather lasted, they should strike Azores about 21st of June, after which he would save time to fly. Some of them wanted it to be an honest ship, and others some of them wanted it, some of them wanted it to be an honest ship, and honest. Some of them wanted it to be an honest ship, and others were in favor of keeping it apart. But the captain treated them as dogs, and they dared not express their wishes to him even in a round robin. Instant obedience was the only safe thing. Slightly got a dozen for looking perplexed when told to take soundings. The general feeling was that Peter was honest just now to lure Wendy's suspicions, but that there is might but that there but that there might but that there might be a chance but that there might be a change when the new suit was ready, which, against her will, she was making for him out of some Hook's wicked garments. It was afterwards whispered among them that on the first night he wore this suit he sat alone in the cabin with Hook's cigar holder in his mouth and one hand clenched, all but the forefinger, which he bent and held threateningly aloft like a hook. Instead of watching the ship, however, we must now return to that desolate home from which three of our characters had taken heartless flight so long ago. It seems a shame to have neglected number 14 all this time, and yet we may be sure that Mrs. Darling does not blame us. If we had returned sooner to look with a sorrowful sympathy at her, she would probably have cried, "Don't be silly. What do I matter? Don't go back and keep an eye on the children. So long as the mothers are so long as the mothers are like this, their children will take advantage of them, and they may lay to death. Even now we venture into that familiar nursery only because its lawful occupants are on their way home. We are merely hurrying on in advance of them, to see that the beds are properly aired and that Mr. and Mrs. Darling do not go out for the evening. We are no more than servants. Why on earth should their beds be properly aired, seeing that they left them in such a thankless hurry? Would it not serve them jolly well? Would it not serve them jolly well right? Would it would it not serve them jolly well right if they came back and found their parents were spending the weekend in the country? It would be the moral lesson that they have been need Or it would be the moral lesson that they have been in need of ever since we've met them. But if you contrive things in this way, Mrs. Darling would have. But if we contrive things in this way, Mrs. Darling would never forgive us. One thing I should like to do immensely, and that is to tell her, in the way authors have, that the children are come back, that indeed they will be here on the Tuesday week. But this would spoil so this would spoil so completely the surprise to which this would spoil so completely the surprise to which Wendy and John and Michael are looking forward. They have been planning it out on the ship. Mother's rapture, father's shout of joy, Nana's leap through the air to embrace them at first, when what they ought to be prepared for is a good hiding. How delicious to spoil it all by breaking the news in advance, so that when they enter grandly Mrs. Darling so that when they enter grandly, Mrs. Darling may not even offer Wendy her mouth, and Mr. Darling may exclaim pettishly, "Dash it all, here are those boys again." However, we should get no thanks even for this. We are beginning to know Mrs. Darling by this time, and we made sure that she would upbraid us for depriving the children of their little pleasure. But, my dear madam, it is 10 days till Thursday week, so that by telling you what is what, we can save you 10 days of unhappiness. Yes, but at what cost? By depriving the children of 10 minutes. Yes, but at what cost? By depriving the children of 10 minutes of delight. Oh, if you look at it in that way, what other way is there in which to look at it? You see, the woman had no proper spirit. I had meant to say extraordinarily nice things about. I had meant to say extraordinarily nice things about her, but I despise her. And not one of them will I say now. She does not really need to be told to have things ready, for they are ready. All the beds are aired, and she never leaves the house. And observe the windows open. For all the for all the use we are to her, For all the use we are to her, we might well go back to the ship. However, as we are here, we may as well stay and look on. That is all we are, lookers on. Nobody really wants us. Nobody really wants us. So let us watch and say jagged things in the hope that some of them will hurt. The only change to be seen in the night nursery is that between 9 and 6 the kennel is no longer there. When the children flew away, Mr. Darling felt in his bones that the all blame was for having chained Nana up, for having chained Nana, for having chained Nana up, for having chained Nana up, and that from first to last she had been wiser than he. Of course, of course, as you have seen, he was quite a simple man. Indeed, he might have passed for a boy again if he had been able to take his boldness off. But he had also a noble sense of justice and a lion's courage to do what seemed right to him. And having thought the matter out with anxious care after the flight of the children, he went out on all fours and crawled into the kennel. To all Mrs. Darling's dearest invitation to him to come out, he replied sadly but firmly, "No, my own one, this is the place for me." In the bitterness in the bitterness of his remorse, he swore that he would never leave the kennel until his children came back. Of course this was a pity, but whatever Mr. Darling did, he had to do in excess. Otherwise he soon gave up doing it. And there never was a more humble man than the once proud George Darling. And as he sat in the kennel of an evening talking with his wife, as he sat in the kennel of an evening, as he sat in the kennel of an evening, talking with his wife or the children on As he sat in the kennel of an evening, talking with his wife or their children, and all their pretty ways. As he sat in the kennel of an evening, talking with his wife or their children, and all their pretty ways. Very touching was the deference to Nana. He would not let her come into the kennel, but on all other matters, he followed her wishes implicitly. Every morning, the kennel was carried by Mr. Darling in it to a cab, which conveyed him to his office, and he returned home in the same way at 6. Something of the strength of character of the man will be seen if you remember how sensitive he was to the opinion of the neighbors. This man whose every moment now attracted surprised attention. This man whose every moment This man whose every moment now attracted surprised attention. Inwardly, inwardly he must have suffered torture, but he preserved a calm exterior even when the young criticized his but he preserved a calm exterior even when the young criticized his little home, and he always lifted his head courteously to any lady who looked inside. He may have been quixotic, but he was magnificent. Soon the inward meaning of leaked out. Soon the inward meaning of it leaked out, and the great heart of the public was touched. Crowds followed the cab, cheering it lustily. Charming girls scaled it to get his autograph. Interviews appeared in the better class of papers, and society invited him to dinner and added, "Do come in the kennel." On that eventful Thursday week, Mrs. Darling was in the night nursery awaiting George's return home. A very sad-eyed woman. Now that we look at her closely and remember the gaiety of her in the old days, all gone now just because she has lost her babes. I find I want to be able to say nice things about her after all. If she was too fond of her rubbishy treat children, she couldn't help it. Look at her look at her in her chair, where she has fallen asleep. Look at her in her chair where she fallen asleep. Look at her look at her in her chair. Look at her in her chair where she Look at her in her chair where she fallen asleep. Look at her in her chair where she has fallen asleep. The corner of her mouth, the corner of her mouth where one, the corner of her mouth where one looks, the corner of her, the corner of her mouth, the corner of her mouth, the corner of her mouth, of her mouth, the corner of her mouth where one looks first is almost withered up. Her hand moves restlessly on her breast, as if she had a pain there, as if she had, as if her hand moves restlessly on her breast, as if she had a pain there. Some like Peter best, and some like Wendy best, but I like her best. Suppose, to make her happy, we whisper to her in her sleep that the breasts are. Suppose, to make her happy, we whisper to her in her sleep that the breasts are coming back. They are really within 2 miles of the window now, and flying strong, but all we need to whisper is that they are on the way. Let's. It is a pity we did it, for she had started up, calling their names, and there is no one in the room but Nana. Oh, Nana, I dreamt my dear ones had come back. Nana had filmy eyes, but all she could do was to put her paw gently on her mistress' lap, and they were sitting together. Those when the kennel was brought back. As Mr. Darling puts his head out to kiss his wife, we see that his face is more worn than of yore. We see that his face is more worn than of yore, but has a softer expression. He gave his head to Lisa, who took it scornfully, for she had no imagination, and was quite incapable of understanding the motives of such a man. Outside, the crowd who had accompanied the cab home Outside, the crowd who had accompanied the cab home were still cheering, and he was naturally not unmoved. "Listen to them," he said. "It is very gratifying." "Lots of little boys," sneered Lisa. "There were several adults today," he assured her he assured her with a faint flush. But when she tossed her head he had not a word to reprove of her. Social success had not spoiled him. It had made him sweeter. For some time he sat with his head out of the canal, talking with Mrs. Darling of his success, and pressing her hand reassuringly when she said she hoped his head would not be turned by it. "But if I had been a weak man," he said, "good heavens, if I have been a weak man!" "And George," she said timidly, "you are as full of remorse as ever, aren't you? You are as full of remorse as ever, aren't you?" "Full of remorse as ever, dearest. See my punishment, living in a kennel. But it is a punish, but it is a pun, but it is a punishment, isn't it, George? You are sure not enjoying it? My love, you may be sure," she begged his pardon. And then, feeling drowsy, he he crawled around in the kennel. "Won't you play me to sleep? Won't you play me to sleep?" he asked, on the nursery piano. And as she was crossing the nursery, he added thoughtlessly, "And shut the window. I feel a draft." "Oh, George, never ask me to do that. The window must always be left open for them. Always, always." Now it was his turn to beg her pardon, and she went to the day nursery and played, and soon he was asleep. And while he slept, Gwen and John and Michael flew into the room. "Oh no, we have to read. We have written it. We have written it so. You have we have written it so because there was a charming arrangement planned by them before we left the ship. But something must have happened since then. But it is not they who have flown it. But it is not they who have flown in. It is Peter and Tinker Bell." Peter's first words fell low. "Quick, Tink," he whispered. "Close the window. Bar it. That's right. Now you and I must get away by the door. And when Wendy comes, she will think her mother has better her out, and she will have to go back with me. Now I understand why the now I understand what had hitherto puzzled me. Hitherto. Now I understand what had hitherto puzzled me. Why, when Peter had exterminated the pirates, he did not return to the island and leave Tink to escort the children to the mainland. This trick had been in his head all the time. Instead of feeling that he was behaving badly, he danced with glee. Then he peeped into the day nursery to see who was playing. He whispered to Tink, "It's Wendy's mother. She's a pretty lady, but not so pretty as my mother. Her mouth is full of thimbles, and not so full as my mother's was." Of course he knew nothing whatever about his mother, but he sometimes bragged about her. He did not know the tune, which was "Home, Sweet Home," but he knew it was saying, "Come back, Wendy, Wendy, Wendy." And he cried exultantly, "You'll never see Wendy again, lady, for the window's barred." He peeped, he peeped in again to see what he peeped in, peeped in, peeped in. He peeped in again to see why the music had stopped, and now he saw that Mrs. Darling had laid her head on the box, and that 2 years were sitting on her eyes. "She wants me to unbar the window," thought Peter, "but I won't, not I." He peeped again, and the tears were still there, or another two had taken their place. She's awfully fond of Wendy," he said to himself. "She's awfully, she's awfully, she's awfully fond of Wendy," he said to himself. He was angry with her now for not seeing why she could not have Wendy. The reason was so simple. "I'm fond of her too. We can both be we can both have her, lady. You can both have her, lady. You can't 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 both have her, lady. But the lady would not make the best of it, and he was unhappy. He ceased to look at her, but even then she would not let go of him. He skipped about them and made funny faces. But when he stopped, it was just as if she was. But when he stopped, it was just as if he were inside him, knocking. Oh, all right, he said at last, and gulped. Then he unbarred the window. Come on, Tick, he cried, with a frightful sneer at the laws of nature. We don't want any silly mothers. And he flew away. Thus Wendy and John thus thus Wendy and John and Michael found the window open for them after all, which of course was more than they deserved. They alighted on, they alighted on the, they alighted on the floor, quite unashamed of themselves, and the youngest one had already forgotten his home. John, he said, looking around him doubtfully, I think I have been here before. Of course you have, Of course you have, you silly. That is your old bed. There is your old bed. So it is, Michael said, but not with much conviction. I say, cried John, the kennel. And he dashed across to look into it. Perhaps Nana is inside it, Wendy said. But John whistled. Hello, he said. There is a man inside it. It's father, exclaimed Wendy. Let me see father. Michael begged eagerly, and he took a good look. He's not so big as the pirate I killed, he said with such a frank disappointment that I am glad Mr. Darling was asleep. He would have been sad if those had been the first words he heard his little Michael said. He would have been he would have been sad if those he would have been sad if those had been the first words he heard his little Michael say. Wendy and John had been taken aback somewhat at finding their father in the kennel. Surely, said John, like one who had lost faith in his memory, he used not to sleep in the kennel. He used, surely he used not to sleep in the kennel. John, Wendy said falteringly, perhaps you don't remember the old life as well as you thought you did. A chill fell upon them, and served them right. It is very it is very careless. It is very careless of mother, said the young scoundrel Joe, not to be here when we come back. It was then that Mrs. Darling began playing again. It's mother, cried Wendy peeping. So it is, said John. Then we are not really your mother. Then you are not really your mother, Wendy? Then we are not then are you not really your mother, Wendy? Asked Michael, who was surely sleeping. Oh dear, exclaimed Wendy, with her first real twinge of remorse. It was quite time we came back. Let us creep in, John suggested, and put our hand over her eyes. But Wendy, who saw that they must break the joyous news more gently, had a better plan. Let us all slip into our beds, and be there when she comes in, just as if we had never been away. And so, when Mrs. Darling went back to the night nursery to see if her husband was asleep, all the beds were occupied. The children waited for her cry of joy, but it did not come. She saw them, but she did not believe they were there. You see, she saw them in their beds. You see, she saw them in their beds so often in her. You see, you see, she saw them in their bed. You see, you see, she saw them in their. You see, she saw them in their beds so often. You see, you, she saw them in their beds so often in her dreams that she thought she was just a dream hanging around her still. You see, she saw them in their beds so often. You see, she saw them in their beds so often in their dreams that she thought that she thought she was, that she thought this was just a dream hanging around her still. That she thought she was just a dream hanging around her still. She sat down in their chair by the fire, where in the old ways she had nursed them. They could not understand this, and a cold fear fell upon all the three of them. Mother, Wendy cried. That's Wendy, she said. But still she was but still she was sure it was the dream. Mother, that's Johnson, she said. Mother, cried Michael. He knew her now. He knew her now. That's Michael, she said, and she stretched out her arm. And she stretched. She said, "That's Michael," she said, and she stretched out her arms for the three little selfish children. And she stretched out her arms for the three little selfish. That's Michael, she said, and she stretched out her arms for the three little selfish. That's Michael, she said, and she stretched out her arms for the three little selfish, selfish, three little selfish children, three little selfish. Oh, that's Michael, she said, and she stretched out her arms for the three little selfish children they would never envelop again. That's Michael, she said, and she stretched out her arms for the three little selfish children they would never envelop again. And she stretched out her arms for the three little selfish children he would never envelop again. Yes, they did. They went round Wendy and John and Michael, who had slipped out of her bed and run to her. George, George, she cried when she could speak. And Mrs. Darling woke to share her bliss. And Nana came rushing in. Then could not have been a lovely, they could not, then, there could not have been a lovelier. There could not have been a lovelier sight, but there was none to see it except a little boy who was staring at the window. He had had ecstasies innumerable that other children can never know, but he was looking through the window at the one joy for which he must be forever buried. And that's the end of chapter 16. The next time.